Today's presentation, new report from the OECD. What does child empowerment mean today? Implications for education and well-being. The presentation is in two stages today. First, we'll hear from OECD Secretary General Mathias Cormann. Then we will hear from the Director of Education and Skills, Andreas Schleicher, after which we'll take questions from those watching us online. With that, I'll hand it over to the Secretary General.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this launch of what does child empowerment mean today. In this report, we focus in particular on the impacts of globalization and the digital transformation on modern childhood. We explore both the barriers and the key facilitators of child empowerment. The analysis in this report draws on insights from a broad range of stakeholders, including students, teachers, researchers, policymakers, and businesses. Child empowerment is a key component of a modern and effective education system. Empowering children means giving them the opportunity and the ability to act on issues that are important and relevant to them. It means equipping children of all ages and abilities, irrespective of their social backgrounds, for the challenges and opportunities ahead of them, enabling them to play a greater role in school life and within their local communities, and ultimately enabling them to fully participate in and benefit from the opportunities in front of them. Child empowerment can help boost social mobility and equality of opportunity. It can have a real positive impact on the school climate by bringing the perspectives of children and by ensuring that policy outcomes are better tailored to the needs of children. While in many OECD education systems, child empowerment is increasingly recognized as a policy objective, as a policy priority, our research found that it is often too vaguely defined rather than a concrete objective. This report proposes a comprehensive definition for child empowerment. It outlines a number of targeted strategies to support child empowerment. First and foremost, by ensuring adequate baseline conditions, such as emotional well-being and physical health. According to our research, worrying trends in mental and physical health, in particular anxiety, depression, and lack of physical activity, are one of the most urgent and pressing challenges to tackle to help achieve genuine children's empowerment across OECD education systems. Of the 21 systems reporting internalizing mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety as a challenge, 13 signaled that this was a pressing challenge, and 17 systems reported that school-related anxiety and stress pose a challenge, with 8 systems highlighting it as a pressing challenge. Belgium, Latvia, and Luxembourg offer examples where specialized health agencies provide support to schools, either as online resources, including information videos, or offering training to teachers and students on mental health-related topics, including loneliness, anxiety, and cyberbullying. Through a partnership with UNICEF, Turkey now includes information on students' behavior and social performance in their end-of-year reports. Another approach is to offer specific lessons on health education and prevention. Iceland, for example, introduced a law in 2021 for the better integration of services in children's interests and provides mental health support for students as a special subject in upper secondary education. Coordinated efforts between education and health policymakers can provide timely mental health support with potential lifelong benefits. Recent OECD work on mental health, including the recommendation on integrated mental health skills and work policy, has also emphasized its connection to people's economic well-being as well as social and environmental living conditions. Second, ensuring teacher training provides the necessary skills to foster child empowerment. This brings to the forefront the importance of teacher education by giving teachers the tools and the ways to adapt their practices to allow for greater participation of children. Students will naturally be more engaged if teachers make lessons more meaningful, accessible, and relevant by anchoring them in children's lived experiences and cultural context. So empowering children to learn through play is more motivating, engaging, and effective than traditional classroom teaching, especially for the lower age groups. To achieve this, teachers will need training to help leverage more innovative pedagogies such as problem-based learning, role-playing, field visits, and hands-on activities. Third, equipping children with the skills and the knowledge they will need for the future, including to make the most of digital opportunities and tools. Increasingly, skills-intensive economies and fast-evolving societies are putting greater pressure on education and skills systems to enable all people to develop the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, and the values that will help them live in a world of constant change. OECD countries need to equip children with the digital skills necessary to succeed over the coming decades. Media education and digital literacy can play a pivotal role. Among 15-year-old students, only around half have been taught strategies in school to detect whether information online is subjective or biased, a challenge that will only become more pronounced with the rise of disinformation and generative AI. Information processing skills, including the ability to conduct research and to critically evaluate the credibility and reliability of online information, will be increasingly important as generative artificial intelligence becomes more widely adopted. Teachers can make lessons about digitalization more relevant, for example, by focusing on the digital content that children consume and learn. Many countries have statutory bodies to coordinate media education, and the report recommends strengthening children's involvement in this. The importance of creating a digital environment that both empowers and protects children is already reflected in the OECD's 2021 recommendation on children in the digital environment, which is helping design the adequate policy frameworks for children to realize the opportunities of the digital environment while minimizing risks and appropriately managing risks like privacy threats and cyberbullying. Fourth, enabling greater involvement in decision-making, notably within school life. Schools need to offer children a greater say in decisions that affect their lives while ensuring that opportunities are age and development appropriate. Student councils, participatory budgeting schemes, student-led projects, and involvement in processes such as designing curricula are examples of ways in which students can be meaningfully involved. In Sweden, the National Agency for Education consults with student unions before suggesting or making changes to the curriculum. In 2022, Ireland made it a legal requirement for the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment to include the president of the Irish Second-Level Students' Union on the council. And Italy's Ministry of Education established a youth panel where youth are consulted on issues related to media literacy and digital security. In the Netherlands and in the Flemish community of Belgium, every school includes student council representatives in the School Participation Council. And across the OECD, there are many other examples in support of children's rights to participate. Some countries have created an ombudsperson for children's rights. Among its membership, the European Network of Ombudspersons for Children counts 44 institutions across 34 countries. This is an important mechanism to make sure children's perspectives are well reflected in policy making and laws, and allows children and their families to make official complaints where that is necessary. The report calls for countries to consider policy measures such as child-oriented budgeting to improve the effectiveness of services for children. In closing, child empowerment enables children to act on issues that are important and relevant to them, develops their confidence and leadership skills, and ensures they can contribute to democratic processes. To help give our children and young people around the world the best possible future. And that's what it is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. We will now move on to a presentation from Andreas Schleicher, the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me just share some of the evidence-based underpinning the messages that you have just heard. First of all, we see very clearly that the nature of childhood is evolving. Children are now seen as really competent actors in their own right, not just as adults in preparation. And we also see that, research highlights meaningful participation of children can actually contribute to a whole range of better cognitive, social, and emotional outcomes. Now, child empowerment is sort of a buzzword. Everybody uses it, but it is rarely defined. And what is important to us is that empowerment does not just imply that children have, some learning opportunities or some say on things, but it's really about the environment that we create to give children the opportunities to become actors in their own right. So this is how we define child empowerment. You can see that here on the screen. Empowered children have the opportunities and abilities to act on issues that are important to them, that are relevant to them. They have the space to learn by taking, calculated risks, by making mistakes, and are seen as key contributors to social processes, to democracy. And that means, again, they're actors in their own right, or not simply adults in the making, or future citizens, as we often call them, but they are really part of the current fabric of our societies and can help us shape the future. When you look at this definition, it comprises a fair number of really important factors. First of all, equity. It is important that all children can benefit from empowerment. It has to account for the age and maturity of children. Empowered children that are young will look very different from children that are adolescents, and the opportunities to participate need to be tailored to those different groups with that in mind. The role of adults is also very, very important. We as adults can be part of the solution by being enablers, or we can be part of the problem by imposing some of the barriers, trying to make children compliant with our norms and ways of seeing the world. So that's also really, really important, the roles of adults. Children need to be given choices on how they exercise their own agency. And finally, it's about children's rights. Now, the United Nations Children's Rights Convention is actually quite explicit about the rights, so protection, provision, and participation of children. So that's an important aspect as well. Now, in this publication, we ask different stakeholders and people with different areas of expertise to answer one simple question. Now, what does child empowerment mean to you in your context? Our first response was from a student. In fact, it was the former president of the Irish Second Level Students Union. And what she suggested is that adults need to avoid, tokenistic, inauthentic ways of including young people in decision-making processes, and making, participation truly accessible through the use also of child-friendly languages, like engaging with children in the language they speak. She also underscored how important it is that you have, one good adult around you. It could be a parent, could be a teacher, it could be anyone around you who supports you in seizing the opportunities and also building your confidence to take risks. She also explains that in many instances, she's often the only young person in the room, which creates other problems, not being in that kind of social environment that you're used to. We had another response from a teacher working in a difficult social context in Chile. And her perspective was that students need to be exposed to real world problems. You build skills often in situations where you face challenges. And and not just be shielded from them. She cites cognitive, ethical, social, emotional, intercultural skills, but also creativity, critical thinking as really the key for empowerment of children that you develop in real life situations. From a policy perspective, colleagues from Norway highlighted challenges to child empowerment. The policy landscape around children is often plagued with inequities, with different ways of exclusion. And for the Norwegians, the answer lies in collaborating with a range of actors, including the children themselves, and forming innovative partnerships that support success of those initiatives. From the private sector, civil society, we had the Lego Foundation that advocates for playful learning and also finding better ways to foster children's agency. Now, from that perspective, children should be empowered to become creative, engaged, and life-wide learners. In order to make that a reality, they need to be equipped with skills and disposition. Again, curiosity, creativity, motivation to learn, with some of the angles that they put in focus. And finally, from a research perspective, colleagues from Utrecht University advocate to move from a stance of research for young people towards research with young people, sort of finding ways to directly engage young people in creating solutions to the problems that they actually are facing. So those are some really interesting perspectives. Now, that brings me to the themes that we cover in the book. And what I'm going to do in the following is just show you some examples from each of the 4 areas. Let's start, with citizens of the day. Let's see children as citizens of today, not just as people, for the future. Education systems are increasingly seeing the benefits of including children in making decisions about things that make a difference to them, including their education, including their well-being. So children are really sort of important contributors here. Research suggests that children enjoy greater participation in decision-making processes, and so they really like to be included, and that they would like to have a greater say on the decisions that actually affect them. It's also important to uphold, children's rights. I talked about this already. And then there are benefits associated with child participation also at the policy level. This can reinforce, social engagement, civic behavior, and promote social cohesion. You learn to become, a democratic citizen by being engaged in democratic collaborative processes in school. And but it's also, can help policymakers design, develop policies that are closely aligned with children's wants and needs. And certainly there are also benefits for schools themselves. For example, participation can promote a sense of belonging for learners. If you have an influence on the environment around you, you think you know who you are, how you engage with your people around us. It can promote self-esteem, self-confidence. Research also suggests that authentic participation in processes such as participatory budgeting, our Secretary General highlighted this already, can be really something that relates to better student outcomes and also better student well-being. Now, where money doesn't just, is an allocated resource, but students themselves have a say on this. Some years ago, Portugal gave every school a little budget. It was just a few euro per student, and the trick, not a lot of money, but the trick was, students themselves could actually decide on where and how that money would be spent, and it changed the culture of education. From students being consumers of prefabricated learning environments, they suddenly, felt in control. They felt, co-creators of that environment, and it made a difference in many different aspects. So not really hard to do, just requires a little bit of attention and doesn't require, endless resources. From our survey of policies and practices in OECD countries, we see many different ways in which children can do and participate in decision-making in their school. You heard already examples from our Secretary General, the example of student councils. Now, those bodies can be found sometimes at the school level, schools actually maintaining them, but also in some countries at the national or at subnational levels. In some countries, the presence of a student body in the school is now actually a legal requirement. Research also suggests that including student councils in processes such as school reforms can actually contribute to the success of those reforms. Now, when you engage people in the design of change processes, they take much greater ownership in the implementation. The only caveat I would make here is something that often, student councils are, elected, and that means typically, children from more privileged backgrounds or children who have more friends in school become representatives. So it's often hard to get, good representation of the student body in that. But that being said, they can be very, very influential and very powerful ways of child engagement. Let's look at media engagement. Now, that's another area that we highlighted here. And I start, just with a couple of results from our PISA assessment. On the vertical axis, you see academic success of students. Now, on the horizontal axis, you see the time students use digital devices. And the light blue line that you see here looks at, technology use for learning in school. You can see when teachers introduce technology for learning, there's not that much of a relationship between technology intensity and the quality of learning outcomes. But when students use technology for leisure at school, their own smartphone, you can see actually there's a steeply declining level of learning outcomes. We don't know what's cause and effect, but this really gives us to think how we introduce technology in a meaningful and structured way, rather than, just giving students devices and let them play with this. That can clearly have downsides when it comes to the quality of learning outcomes. Another thing that PISA shows quite clearly is that there's a significant share of young people, in this case 15-year-olds, who feel anxious when they don't have their smartphone with them. You can look at Turkey, you can look at Malaysia, where that's almost, 70% of students. So it's a real issue. You can almost call it, addiction. And what is very clear from our data is that, where students feel anxious when they don't have their smartphone with them, they do less well in the PISA assessment, but they also are less happy with their lives. They feel kind of less in control of their emotions, and they feel less resistant to stress. So we need to take those kinds of outcomes really, really seriously and try to engage with them. Now, when you look at the report, what the analysis suggests is that the who and what and how of technology use are often more important than just, how long students are exposed when you look at the effects of media on children. Now, the digital environment and schools are obviously two very important spaces where, identity formation really unfolds for children. And media education, which brings in their lived experiences in this journey, can really be very, very important to empower children. As our Secretary General already highlighted, teachers are the key actors on this when it comes to, education. And from the 22 countries for which we have data, you see that most incorporate social and emotional skills in teacher education, at least initially, and often also in continued professional development. But when you get to the bottom of the chart, you can see it looks very different when it comes to algorithms, health literacy, digital citizenship. The picture here does not yet look as good. Many teachers do not get, sufficient preparation either initially or when they are in service. So investing in the profession to build the foundations for media literacy is going to be a very, very important continued priority. And let's conclude the picture, with just looking at digital inequalities. That certainly remains an important part of the agenda. Here on the chart, you can see, when we talk to policymakers about the most pressing policy challenges, cyberbullying, clearly, the number one on this, exposure to mis and disinformation, and often you can't limit that in a world of, ChatGPT. That is a reality. So enabling young people to navigate ambiguity, to distinguish fact from opinion, and to no longer teach children, fixed answers, but rather to raise the right questions, that becomes critically important. inequalities in digital skills or the way they are used, digital citizenship, inequalities in access to tools. You can see policymakers are quite concerned with many of those dimensions in overcoming. And you can see much of this is really about the second and third digital divide. It's no longer about, just access to technology. That's usually, quite well established in OECD countries. It's really about the empowerment and use of those technologies in a constructive phase. So how can you do that? The most obvious priority is to minimize, gaps in access. And examples here include programs to increase not just the quantity of digital resources, but most importantly, the quality of digital resources. Broadband, both in school and also to some extent at home. Equally important is to promote digital skill development in students, but also in teachers. And that includes the curriculum, that includes teacher education, but also extracurricular activities. And then some countries also develop national digital skill strategies and action plans. And they do that often together with, children and young people to reflect, their needs and wants. And then, the different actors need to be able to recognize, mitigate, manage digital risks. Pressing digital risks you just saw, include cyberbullying, exposure to mis and disinformation. And of course, those kinds of risks will manifest themselves in very different ways depending on the age group of children and their social context you deal with. So they require tailored responses to this. Now, what we found here is that the programs that are in place in countries are often too general, pay too little attention, and are not sufficiently targeted to those students who are most at risk. Well, that in a nutshell is what the report provides. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Andreas, thank you very much for that presentation and this new report. We're going to go right into the questions that we're getting from the Zoom. And those of you who are watching us virtually, please feel free now to start sending your questions in. The first one, Andreas, that we're hearing in different ways from a variety of folks watching is essentially, how do you convince policymakers about the important role of children's empowerment? You've come up with some good examples of what's being done out there, but how can you convince policymakers across all the countries that this is an area that you need to go into?
Yeah, actually, on the positive side, there is usually quite good awareness. I need to put my microphone. On the positive side, there's actually now quite good awareness among policymakers for this agenda. This is a priority. It's probably more an issue of finding the right tools and mechanisms and to ensure that the whole system becomes enabling for the needs and wants of children. So I think it's not so much about convincing them, but about providing policymakers with better frameworks, better tools, and also to make this a kind of experience that actually works for everyone.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question that is being discussed in the chat behind us is ensuring equity in child empowerment. How can we ensure that children with special needs aren't left behind, children from more disadvantaged backgrounds? You talk about this a bit in the report, but maybe you can add something.
Yeah, I think that question of equity and inclusion is absolutely crucial here. And the country that has put a lot of effort into this is Norway. It doesn't come automatically. If you have mechanisms of child participation like student councils, they are often still representing the kind of majority view or the children that are most amenable to or most popular in the students. So it requires a quite conscious and deliberate effort to understand and see the voices of children who may be more at the margins of our society, and therefore more conscious ways to enlist an engagement. Students with special needs are perhaps the most challenging group. Making us hear their voices is quite critical. But actually, the more open we are to the different perspectives of different children groups, the more likely we come up with answers that actually reflect the whole spectrum of children's needs.
I suppose a logical follow-up to that would be a similar question. Another potentially disadvantaged group in this question of child empowerment would be refugee children, immigrant children, those with lesser language skills in the country where they're living. How can they be brought into this empowerment picture?
Yeah, I think children with an immigrant background, children who cannot, access many of the resources because of language barriers are a very, very clear kind of target group and a growing one. And that's, I think, something in most, OECD countries, that it's a growing share of young people in schools, so education systems. And that really comes down to not just the system, but very much to the educators in the school who make those children visible, who actually, draw on their potential, their benefits. Canada is an example of a country that has, not seen immigrants or refugees as a problem to the education systems, but as a key resource. You find teachers in the classroom often, leveraging the experience that those children bring, from maybe their country of origin, from their culture into the mainstream education system. But it does require, good preparation. And what our data actually show is that preparedness for dealing with multicultural, multilingual environment is very challenging for many teachers. When you ask teachers what you feel least well prepared for, after digitalization, is typically dealing with children from different cultural or linguistic environments. So I do think we need to redouble our efforts to provide better support for educators to ensure that they can do whatever it takes to include those children and youth.
Another question, something that may seem obvious, but children will never be equal partners in school decision-making processes. Educators, the educational system, governments will be running the systems. What happens when children and their wishes, their desire for change potentially isn't met? How should the system deal with that?
But, schools are not particularly democratic institutions, nor should they be. In a way, I think this is to have a say in a process doesn't mean that you always, get your wish. This is part of, I think, the process of democratic engagement, to give children a voice, to listen to that voice, but also make them understand that there are other variables entering in the picture. That process in itself, I think, is the best way how you engage people in society. I think later in life, you're going to encounter this in many different contexts. You have your views, you have your perspectives, others do them too. And the more we can make those different perspectives understood and transparent and help children themselves understand, this is your kind of perspective on this, but take into account those other dimensions in school. If you let school students choose, the subjects they learn in school, they probably, intuitively pick the easy, interesting subjects and miss out on maybe some areas that are really important for their future. So this is where, as an educator, you have to help children not only understand, what you love to do, but also what is important for your long-term future, and to negotiate those kinds of process. But really, that's the foundation of our democracies, and I think very, very important to do in this process.
We've been speaking a lot up until now about children's empowerment. It's the title of the report, but inside that question is also families and the significant role that families have to play in child empowerment. So how can you empower families outside the classroom, beyond what's being done now, or improving on what's being done now?
Well, absolutely. Unfortunately, we do not have, direct data from families in this. This is actually one of the kind of gaps in our evidence base, but it's an obvious kind of link. Many of the foundations for a positive engagement of children are built in families and at homes, and this is where you learn to become a member of, a social group, where you have to, you encounter, people with different ideas and perspectives. So families have a very important role to play, to provide their children with opportunities to meaningfully engage, and not to, withdraw from that. It's very easy today with technology to just let children, play their own way. I think as a parent, you have a very, very important responsibility to make children a productive member of a community. And that, then will play out in the way they engage in school later on.
A bit of a provocative question, given what we're talking about here. How ready do you think teachers, school principals, and other education officials actually are to share decision-making with students so they can fully participate?
Very interesting question. One must say there's still a minority of systems that have, many systems have policies in place, frameworks in place, they have intentions on this, but when you look on the ground, much of that is still quite tokenistic or very formal. There are formal kind of consultation mechanisms, but when you look at, child agency, you have some discretion over what you learn, how you learn, where you learn, with whom you learn, being engaged, participatory budgeting. Do you have an influence over how resources are invested? All of those questions, I would still think that is still more the exception than the rule. The good thing is that awareness for this is there. You do have a general interest in this. I do think everybody understands that children are not just, adults in the making, but that they are a very important voice in their own right. And that, technology also gives them the tools to, make that voice increasingly heard. So I do think this is the moment to provide a more engaging and open environment and to take children really serious as players in those processes, as people who can contribute, who can actually shape better and more relevant learning opportunities than we currently have.
I just heard you say this is the moment, and this is certainly a moment where digital technology is playing an increasing role, an increasingly importantly role across society and in education. And as you pointed out in the presentation that you've just made, digital technology can sometimes have a negative impact on children's empowerment, making them a bit more sedentary, a bit more passive, sometimes more concerned about their well-being. How can we empower children in this increasingly digital world?
Yeah, I think this is one of the massive challenges that we face. And what is very clear is that, technology is not a magic power. All it is an incredible amplifier and an amazing accelerator. It's going to amplify good ideas and good practice in the same way it can amplify poor ideas and bad practice. It can make children the most imaginative creators, of new things. And you can see that happening, actually. Children actually using technology to create amazing things, to engage in amazing learning environments. But, the consumptive use of technology clearly has more negative effects than positive effects. We should be concerned that, about the negative relationship that we see about, smartphone use at home and at school, and not just, cognitive learning outcomes, but also social emotional well-being. So the idea really here is how can we structure this? How can we actually, and this is also, again, it's a question of the age group that we are dealing with. How can we give children meaningful encounters with technologies where the creative aspects of technology dominate, not the consumptive parts? And this is something that is relevant in school. And there you could see from the data we can deal with it quite well. Actually, we can structure those environments. It's much harder to do at home. And again, what you wish today is that, schools do not just shut their door, but that they take a more active approach to help parents actually navigate that digital world for their children. As a school, you have a lot of experience with those kinds of things. As a teacher, you have many children in front of you. As a parent, you may have one or two. And I do believe that schools can play an incredibly important role here to build that bridge and help parents better understand, how they can, reap the benefits of technology for their children, but still navigate the risks. And, generative artificial intelligence is just, massively amplifying this as well. It also comes back to how we, deal with education in school. If, we continue to teach children answers, prefabricated answers in a world of ChatGPT, where this is no longer rewarded, rather than critically question the wisdom that they see, then I think artificial intelligence can, magnify disinformation, misinformation. If instead, we focus more on helping children understand, complex arguments, different perspectives on things, how to navigate different sources of information, the more they are going to be empowered to actually find their own way through a world like that is in the digital world.
You mentioned the biggest challenge potentially, maybe also the biggest opportunity, which is AI, and we've had a lot of questions about AI just now in the background. And so I guess it's the flavor of the questions is, can we trust AI to empower children, not to exploit them? And I guess the converse side of that is, can AI actually empower children?
Yeah, again, AI is not a magic tool. it, is an incredible amplifier and accelerator of processes. And the best we can do is actually help children and teachers better understand, what are the, benefits, what are the risks, how does AI actually work, how does AI generate its information. And when you understand those kinds of processes, at least in the ideas underpinning it, you're much better prepared to engage with this. And that's what we should expect. When it comes to educators, it's also very important that teachers are much more closely engaged in the design of those kinds of technologies and the application of them, like where teachers are not engaged in the design of those kinds of technologies, they rarely are good at implementing them. And we do too little of that. We still, buy technological solutions, AI, software packages, rather than ensure that those who are experts in pedagogy, who understand children, can actually deal with this. But ultimately, the technological aspect is just, the surface of that. I think the most important part is that education remains a kind of a social and relational experience. And that's true for, the children, and that's true for the adults. AI is not going to replace teachers, again, education will always be relational, social, but teachers who are good at using AI may well replace teachers who are not great at using that and those kinds of technologies. And I think the same, children who are super empowered by those new technologies clearly have a different set of opportunities than children who struggle.
Andreas, moving away from the technology questions and back to the bigger picture. This report, some people are saying to us here, seems to speak a lot about individual empowerment of children. What about collective empowerment? How do we nurture the collective empowerment skills of all students as a whole?
Look, I think that's a fair question, and I must say this is still a limitation of this report. Perhaps our analysis, we have a much better understanding of individual agency, the individual empowerment, than co-agency. How can we do things together, or collective agency? How do we make the whole bigger than the sum of its part? And I do believe we need better research to better understand this. But once again, school provides a unique environment for this. Technology, makes you an individual user of, your processes, but school is the place where you meet people from different, walks of life with different perspectives, different ideas, different interests. And so school is actually a really important social environment for this now.
I see here that we've had questions about different ages of students. We've seen questions about very young students and how do you involve and empower them more. And we've seen questions about adult students in schools. And so I guess the big question that's being asked by a variety of folks here is, how do we sustain child empowerment over the entire educational process from the beginning through graduation? And what are the age appropriate methods to develop better student agency?
Yeah, on the one hand, I think child empowerment is something that, extends across the whole age range. It's not like you need to be 18 years to be able to vote, but actually, we can find different opportunities for different age groups to meaningfully take responsibility for their lives and for the lives of others. This is really what this report highlights, that there are actually many, many ways for engaging children later in life. And what I would say, and this really relates to your question, if we do not build those foundations early on, it's going to be much harder for adults later on to take responsibility for their lives, to take responsibility for the lives of other people, to become, effective and citizens in the societies they live in. And I do believe, that those foundations are very, very critically important. So sustaining, that energy is perhaps not the challenge. Children who have taken, a leadership role in school, who have been very active socially, they're going to find their way to make their voice heard also in adult life. It's more a question of how do we facilitate and support those for whom that may be less natural.
I think I'm going to conclude with one final question here, summing up a bit of what people are saying in the chat. Education is always in flux. Performance is varying across countries. Students are dealing with all sorts of new challenges often. Everything you've mentioned in your report, from bullying, digital distractions, new ways of learning. Are children today less empowered? Are they more empowered? And how would empowerment eventually help us improve the overall results and experience that children are having?
That is I think, a really difficult and tricky question. And I'm not sure there is a clear answer to this. In one way, you could argue actually that children in today's world are often a lot less empowered than a generation or two ago. When I went to school, I had to find my own way to school. I had to take the risk in traffic. I had to get through to this. After school, I could play where I wanted. Today, you brought by your parents to school, everything is safe. And actually, children today often have a tougher schedule than adults. You look at, in the morning you are to school, then there come all these after-school activities, and that, can work against child empowerment, taking away discretion from children to shape their own lives and the lives of others. So in one way, you could say, well, maybe we have, gone reverse on some of this. At the very same time, I do think today we have very different opportunities for particularly the collective empowerment of children. I do think in the past, school was much more top-down. Today we have, participatory budgeting. We have, student councils. We have different technology where children can, express and contribute and socialize in entirely different ways. So certainly we have a lot better tools today. Some institutions are starting to use them, but, would I make a judgment? Are we doing better than in the past? I'm not sure. I think there are just different forms of empowerment, and I think we have to use today's tools in much more productive and constructive ways to ensure that children are truly empowered.
Andreas, thanks very much. I'm sure the conversation will continue on this topic. For everyone watching us, thank you for joining. You'll find all the information, the report itself, on the OECD website. And wishing you all a very nice day. Thank you.